What if I told you that a 42-year-old woman, humiliated and despised by her own husband, discovered something on her property that changed her life forever? Something that was right there in front of her, but she had never noticed. Do you believe it's possible to find the solution to all your problems in the most unlikely place? This is a true story about how an unexpected discovery can completely transform a person's destiny. What she found will leave you speechless, and how she used this discovery is even more surprising. Get ready for a journey that will make you question everything you think you know about lost opportunities and hidden possibilities. Sarah Elizabeth woke up once again to the sound of the door slamming. It was 5 in the morning, and Robert was leaving for another one of his work commitments that lasted until the early hours of the morning. She knew they weren't business meetings that kept him away from home, but the pain of admitting the truth was greater than her courage to face it. At 42, Sarah found herself trapped in a marriage that had become an emotional prison. 20 years of union, 2 children already grown and independent, and a life that seemed to have lost all meaning. Robert, who was once the man of her dreams, now treated her with a contempt that cut deeper than any blade. "You're good for nothing," were the words that echoed in her mind every morning. A failed woman who never managed to do anything right in life. The constant humiliations had become part of the routine, like brushing teeth or drinking coffee. Sarah had gotten used to the pain, but that didn't mean it hurt any less. The house where they lived, a rural property on the outskirts of a small town in Louisiana, was located near a swamp that Robert always criticized. "Even the place where you brought me to live is a failure," he would say, pointing to the wetland area that stretched for several acres behind the property. For Robert, that swamp was a symbol of everything wrong in their lives. For Sarah, it would become something very different. On that specific morning, after Robert left, Sarah walked to the back porch and looked at the swamp for the first time with different eyes. The still water reflected the grey sky, and she saw herself in that reflection, stagnant, motionless, lifeless. But there was something else in that image that caught her attention. Small signs of life emerging from the apparent desolation. Aquatic plants that flourished despite adverse conditions, birds that found food and shelter in that environment others considered useless. It was at that moment that Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever. She didn't know yet what she would do, but she knew she couldn't continue living like a withered plant in infertile soil. The failure that Robert so often pointed out in her life would be transformed into fuel for something he could never imagine. The tears that rolled down her face that morning weren't just from sadness. For the first time in years, Sarah also cried from relief. The relief of someone who finally decides to stop accepting a life they don't deserve. The swamp before her was no longer a symbol of failure, but of possibilities she couldn't yet see completely. The pain she felt in her chest was real and deep, but there was something different in her now. A small flame that Robert, with all his contempt, hadn't been able to completely extinguish. Sarah didn't know that this flame would become a fire of determination that would take her to places she never dreamed of reaching. That night, when Robert came home with the scent of another perfume on his clothes, Sarah didn't cry. She just looked at him and said, "We need to talk." They were the first words of true courage she had spoken in years. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation that seemed hopeless? Share your experience in the comments. The conversation Sarah had promised took place 3 days later, on a Saturday morning when Robert finally didn't have urgent commitments. She had rehearsed the words hundreds of times, but when the moment came, everything came out differently than planned. "I want a divorce," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Robert looked at her as if she had said the most absurd thing in the world. He laughed with disdain, that cruel laugh she knew so well. "You? Asking for divorce? And what are you going to live on? You have no profession, no money, nothing. Without me, you are nothing." Robert's words were like daggers, but this time, instead of burying themselves in Sarah's heart, they ricocheted off an invisible armor she had built in recent days. "Maybe you're right," Sarah replied calmly. "Maybe I'm nothing now, but I'd rather be nothing alone than be nothing by your side." The surprise on Robert's face was evident. He didn't expect this reaction. The separation process was faster than Sarah had imagined. Robert, who always prided himself on being a practical man, saw the separation as an opportunity to get rid of what he considered dead weight and start a new life with the woman he had been keeping for months. For him, Sarah would keep the house near the swamp, that useless property as he called it, and he would keep the assets that really mattered. Sarah signed the papers with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't exactly happiness, but it wasn't sadness either. It was relief. A deep and liberating relief, as if she had carried a giant stone on her back for 20 years and had finally put it down. Alone in the house for the first time in decades, Sarah walked through the empty rooms. Robert had taken most of the furniture and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. The silence was no longer oppressive, it was welcoming. She could breathe without fear of being criticized, could think without being interrupted by malicious comments. On that first night alone, Sarah went out to the porch and looked at the swamp again. The full moon reflected on the still water, creating a spectacle of beauty she had never noticed before. Small sounds of nature, crickets, frogs, the gentle movement of water, created a nocturnal symphony that calmed her. It was then that she saw something that would change everything. A large, dark figure moving slowly along the edge of the swamp. At first, Sarah felt fear, but soon realized it was an animal. With a flashlight in hand, she approached cautiously and discovered it was an alligator, a magnificent female that seemed to be searching for something specific in the muddy banks. The alligator appeared to be preparing a nesting site, using her powerful tail to clear vegetation and create a mound of earth and plant material. Instead of fleeing when it saw Sarah, the animal looked at her with ancient knowing eyes, as if acknowledging her presence without fear. At that moment, Sarah felt an inexplicable connection with that creature. Both were alone. Both were preparing for a new chapter in their lives. The hope that had begun to sprout in Sarah's heart gained strength that night. She didn't know yet what the future held, but for the first time in years, she was curious to find out. The separation, which Robert saw as Sarah's final failure, was revealing itself to be the first step of an extraordinary journey. As she watched the alligator continue her nesting preparations, Sarah smiled. Maybe Robert was right about one thing. She really wasn't anything she had been before, but that wasn't a weakness. It was an opportunity to become everything she always wanted to be. The first month alone brought a harsh reality that Sarah hadn't fully anticipated. The bills began to arrive, and she realized her financial situation was much more precarious than she had imagined. Robert had always controlled the family finances, and Sarah discovered she had been left with very little. The alimony Robert paid barely covered the basic expenses of the house. The electricity bill, water bill, property taxes, grocery shopping, everything seemed to conspire against her. Sarah spent sleepless nights calculating and recalculating numbers on pieces of paper, trying to make the money last until the end of the month. Maybe he was right, Sarah thought in the most difficult moments. Maybe I really am good for nothing. But whenever these thoughts arose, she remembered the majestic alligator she had seen that first night. Where would it be now? Had it finished preparing its nest? It was during one of these sleepless nights that Sarah heard different sounds coming from the swamp. Not the usual night sounds, but something more purposeful. She grabbed the flashlight and went out to investigate. There she was again, the alligator she had begun to call Hope. This time, she wasn't alone. There were two other alligators nearby, and Hope was carefully tending to what appeared to be a large nest mound. Sarah watched, fascinated, as Hope used her body to regulate the temperature of the nest, occasionally adding or removing vegetation. The other alligators seemed to be standing guard, creating a protective perimeter around the nesting area. There was something deeply moving about witnessing this ancient ritual of motherhood and protection. During the following weeks, the alligators became regular fixtures in Sarah's daily routine. She began observing them from a respectful distance, learning their patterns and behaviors. She discovered that Hope's nest contained dozens of eggs, carefully buried in the warm, decomposing vegetation that would incubate them naturally. The financial situation, however, continued to deteriorate. Sarah tried some temporary jobs in town, cleaning, cooking in restaurants, sales, but her lack of professional experience and years away from the job market made everything more difficult. Besides, the property was far from town, and she didn't have her own car. It was during one of these frustrated attempts to find work that Sarah had a revealing conversation with Miss Evangeline, an elderly Creole woman who sold farm-fresh eggs at the town market. "Child," said the lady, "you got yourself a rural property and you're struggling. The land is a blessing. You just need to know how to use what the good Lord gave you." "But I don't know anything about farming or raising animals," Sarah replied, discouraged. "Don't need to know everything at once, honey. You start with what you got." "And what you got?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I have a swamp and some alligators that have made nests there." Miss Evangeline's eyes lit up with interest. "Alligators with nests? Child, do you know what you're sitting on?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. "What do you mean?" "Alligator eggs, honey. They're like gold to the right people, rich in protein, bigger than chicken eggs, and taste like nothing else in this world. Some folks paid top dollar for them." That night, Sarah researched everything she could about alligator eggs on the dial-up internet that barely worked in her house. She discovered that alligator eggs were indeed considered a delicacy in many parts of the world, prized for their unique flavor and exceptional nutritional content. They contained more protein than chicken eggs and were rich in essential amino acids. But the most surprising information she found was about the fitness and bodybuilding community's growing interest in natural, high-protein foods. Alligator eggs were being mentioned in underground fitness forums as the ultimate natural protein source, but they were nearly impossible to obtain commercially. When the sun rose, Sarah went out to the swamp with a determination she hadn't felt in months. Hope was there, still tending to her nest with the dedication of a devoted mother. The sight of the massive alligator protecting her future offspring filled Sarah with a strange sense of kinship. "What if," Sarah murmured to herself, observing the scene, "what if the solution was here all along?" The idea was unconventional, she knew that, but unconventional didn't mean impossible. And at that moment, with bills piling up and options running out, Sarah was willing to explore any opportunity that could change her situation. What began as financial desperation slowly transformed into something much deeper. Sarah began studying alligator behavior with the dedication of a wildlife researcher, learning about their nesting cycles, egg-laying patterns, and protective instincts. She discovered that alligators were incredibly intelligent creatures with complex social structures and strong maternal bonds. Hope, the alligator Sarah had first encountered, showed remarkable tolerance for human presence. While the other alligators maintained their distance, Hope seemed to accept Sarah as a non-threatening observer of her domain. This acceptance was crucial as Sarah learned that disturbing a nesting alligator could be extremely dangerous. "You're something special, aren't you?" Sarah would whisper while watching Hope tend to her nest from a safe distance. "We're both protecting something precious." The attachment Sarah developed for the alligators surprised even herself. After years of feeling rejected and worthless, finding creatures that coexisted peacefully with her presence was profoundly healing. She began to understand their rhythms, their communication patterns, and most importantly, their nesting behavior. It was while observing Hope more closely that Sarah made the discovery that would change everything. The nest was ready to hatch. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. Hope's increased vigilance, the slight sounds coming from within the nest mound, and the way she positioned herself to assist the emerging hatchlings. The hatching process was a miracle to witness. Sarah watched from her concealed observation point as dozens of tiny alligators emerged from their shells. immediately calling to their mother with high-pitched chirps. Hope carefully helped them out of the nest and guided them toward the water, where they would begin their lives. But Sarah noticed something that sparked an idea. Not all the eggs had hatched. In nature, this was normal. Some eggs were infertile, others didn't develop properly. These unhatched eggs, Sarah realized, were typically left to decompose in the nest. What if they could be harvested and used instead of going to waste? The idea of collecting the unhatched eggs seemed like a way to create opportunity without disrupting the natural process. Sarah began researching the legalities and practicalities of egg collection, discovering that with proper permits, it was possible to harvest a portion of alligator eggs for commercial purposes. Her research led her to fascinating discoveries about the nutritional value of alligator eggs. They contained 185% more protein than chicken eggs, had a complete amino acid profile, perfect for muscle building, and were naturally free of antibiotics and hormones. The fitness community was already seeking them out, but supply was virtually non-existent. Sarah spent weeks learning to identify which eggs were viable and which could be safely harvested. She studied the timing of collection, proper storage methods, and food safety protocols. The process required precision, respect for the animals, and perfect timing. The first time Sarah successfully collected a small number of unhatched eggs, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. These weren't just eggs, they represented a potential bridge between her desperate circumstances and an uncertain but hopeful future. That night, Sarah prepared her first alligator egg omelette. The egg was nearly 3 times the size of a chicken egg, with a rich, creamy yolk and a flavor that was both familiar and exotic. It was substantial, satisfying, and unlike anything she had ever tasted. As she savored that first bite, Sarah realized she wasn't just eating an unusual meal, she was tasting possibility. The connection she had formed with Hope and the other alligators had led her to something that could change her life if she had the courage to pursue it. The affection she felt for the alligators, especially Hope, gave Sarah the confidence that she could develop a sustainable relationship with these magnificent creatures. She would protect their habitat, ensure their safety, and in return, she could harvest the eggs that would otherwise go to waste. For the first time since her separation, Sarah went to sleep with genuine excitement about the future. She had found more than just a potential source of income. She had discovered a purpose that connected her to the natural world in a way she had never experienced before. Sarah's first attempts at commercializing alligator eggs were met with skepticism and confusion. When she approached Miss Evangeline about selling them at the local market, the elderly woman's reaction was a mixture of intrigue and concern. "Child, you sure about this? People around here ain't used to eating gator eggs. They might think you've lost your mind." But Sarah had done her research. She knew that the key wasn't to market to traditional consumers. It was to find the niche market that would appreciate what she had to offer. She began reaching out to local gyms, health food stores, and even contacted bodybuilders through online forums. The response from the fitness community was immediate and enthusiastic. Marcus, a competitive bodybuilder who trained at the local gym, became her first regular customer after trying a single egg. "Sarah, this is incredible," he told her after his first alligator egg breakfast. "The protein content is off the charts, and I feel like I've sustained energy for hours. How many can you get me per week?" Word spread quickly through the tight-knit bodybuilding community. Sarah found herself with a waiting list of customers before she had even figured out how to scale her operation. The eggs were selling for $15 each, 10 times the price of premium chicken eggs, and people were eager to pay. But Sarah's real breakthrough came when she developed her signature product, alligator egg protein shakes. She experimented with different recipes, combining the raw eggs with natural ingredients to create what she called Swamp Gold, a protein drink that contained more bioavailable protein than any commercial supplement on the market. The process of creating the perfect protein shake required weeks of experimentation. Sarah tested different ratios of egg to liquid, various natural flavorings, and preservation methods. She transformed her kitchen into a laboratory, measuring protein content, testing shelf life, and perfecting the taste. The first batch of Swamp Gold was a revelation. The drink was creamy, naturally sweet, and provided an incredible 45 grams of complete protein per serving. When Marcus tried it, his reaction was immediate. "Sarah, you need to patent this. This is going to revolutionize the supplement industry." Encouraged by the success, Sarah began scaling her operation. She learned to time her egg collection with the alligator's natural cycles, ensuring she could harvest sustainably without disrupting their reproduction. She developed relationships with multiple nesting females, creating a network of collection sites throughout the swamp. The production was still artisanal and small scale, but Sarah was building something unique. She could produce about 200 eggs per month during nesting season, which translated to roughly 150 bottles of Swamp Gold and 50 fresh eggs for direct sale. Her first major breakthrough came when Jake, a professional trainer from New Orleans, discovered her products through Marcus. Jake worked with elite athletes and was always looking for natural performance enhancers that weren't available to the general public. "Sarah, I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this," Jake told her during his first visit to the swamp. "My clients are seeing strength gains and recovery times that are unprecedented. You're sitting on a gold mine." Jake became more than a customer. He became Sarah's first business partner. He helped her understand the premium supplement market, connected her with high-end clients, and even invested in better equipment for her operation. The transformation was remarkable. Sarah went from struggling to pay her bills to having a waiting list of customers willing to pay premium prices for her products. She was creating something that didn't exist anywhere else in the world. A completely natural, sustainable protein source that was superior to anything on the market. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah was discovering talents and abilities she never knew she possessed. She was a natural entrepreneur, a skilled product developer, and surprisingly, an excellent marketer. The woman Robert had dismissed as good for nothing was proving to be exceptionally good at creating something from nothing. The alligator eggs weren't just a product. They were the foundation of Sarah's transformation from a broken, desperate woman into a confident businesswoman who was pioneering an entirely new industry. News about Sarah's unique protein products spread through Louisiana's fitness community like wildfire. Jake's connections in New Orleans led to orders from professional athletes, and soon Sarah found herself shipping Swamp Gold to bodybuilders across the Gulf Coast. The first major commercial breakthrough came when Iron Mike Boudreaux, a legendary powerlifter and gym owner in Baton Rouge, placed an order for 100 bottles of Swamp Gold for his elite training facility. Mike had heard about the product through his network and wanted to test it with his competitive athletes. "Sarah, I've been in this game for 30 years, Mike told her over the phone. "I've seen every supplement, every protein powder, every performance enhancer. But what you've created is something else entirely. My athletes are reporting strength gains they've never experienced before." The success at Iron Mike's gym created a domino effect. Other gym owners began reaching out, wanting to offer Swamp Gold to their members. Sarah found herself with more orders than she could fill, a problem she had never imagined having just months earlier. But success brought unexpected challenges. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries received complaints about Sarah's operation from neighbors who were concerned about the commercial harvesting of alligator eggs. Some questioned whether what she was doing was legal, while others worried about the impact on local alligator populations. Sarah discovered she was operating in a legal gray area. While Louisiana had regulations for alligator hunting and hide production, there were no specific laws governing the commercial collection of eggs for food purposes. She was literally creating a new category of agriculture. The situation became more complicated when a state wildlife inspector arrived at her property unannounced. Officer Thibodeau was a veteran wildlife official who had never encountered anything like Sarah's operation. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 25 years, and I've never seen anything like what you've got here," he admitted, watching Sarah demonstrate her egg collection process. "You're going to need permits, but I'm not even sure what permits apply to this situation." For weeks, Sarah lived in uncertainty, unsure whether she would be shut down or allowed to continue. The fear of losing everything she had built was overwhelming, but instead of giving up, she decided to be proactive. Sarah hired a lawyer who specialized in agricultural law and began the process of obtaining proper permits. She worked with wildlife biologists to document that her harvesting methods were sustainable and didn't harm alligator populations. She even funded a study to prove that her collection of unhatched eggs actually improved overall nest success rates by removing potential sources of infection. The bureaucratic process was expensive and time-consuming, but Sarah was determined to do things the right way. She used the profits from her growing business to pay for legal fees, environmental studies, and facility improvements that would meet state standards. During this period, Sarah also made a crucial decision about scaling her operation. Rather than trying to harvest eggs from wild alligators indefinitely, she began developing a controlled breeding program. She partnered with a local alligator farm to create dedicated breeding pools where she could manage the entire process from mating to egg collection. The controlled environment allowed Sarah to increase her production while ensuring the highest quality and safety standards. She could now produce eggs year-round, not just during natural nesting season, and she had complete control over the health and diet of the breeding alligators. The investment in proper facilities and permits paid off when Sarah received her official license to operate Louisiana's first commercial alligator egg production facility. The state even featured her operation as an example of innovative agriculture in their economic development materials. With legal status secured, Sarah's business exploded. Orders came in from across the country as word spread about the incredible protein source she had developed. Supplement companies began approaching her about licensing deals, and fitness influencers started featuring swamp gold in their content. Sarah realized she had created more than just a product. She had established an entirely new industry. The woman who had once felt worthless was now being recognized as a pioneer in sustainable protein production. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was in her newly constructed processing facility, overseeing the production of her latest batch of swamp gold, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Sarah Elizabeth, this is Dr. Jennifer Martinez from the USDA's Alternative Protein Initiative. We've been following your work with great interest, and we'd like to discuss a potential partnership." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. The USDA had been tracking her operation and wanted to feature her as a case study in sustainable protein production. They were particularly interested in her breeding program and the environmental benefits of her harvesting methods. "Ms. Elizabeth, what you've accomplished is remarkable," Dr. Martinez continued. "You've created a completely sustainable protein source with a smaller environmental footprint than traditional livestock. We'd like to invite you to present your work at the National Sustainable Agriculture Conference." The recognition from the USDA opened doors Sarah had never imagined. Within weeks, she was fielding calls from venture capitalists, supplement companies, and even international buyers interested in licensing her methods for other markets. But perhaps the most satisfying recognition came from an unexpected source. Robert, her ex-husband, appeared at her facility one afternoon, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the modern equipment and bustling activity. "Sarah," he said, struggling to find words as he looked around the operation that employed 15 people and generated millions in revenue. I saw the article about you in the Times-Picayune. I can't believe what you've built here." Sarah received him professionally, but without warmth. "Thank you for coming by, Robert. It's been a lot of work. That swamp I always complained about, you turned it into this." He gestured at the facility around them. I was wrong about everything. About you, about this place, about what was possible. You weren't wrong about who I was then, Sarah replied calmly. But people can change when they find their purpose. Robert's visit was brief, but it represented the complete reversal of their circumstances. The man who had once made her feel worthless was now standing in awe of what she had accomplished. The business continued to grow exponentially. Sarah's Swamp Gold became the preferred protein supplement for professional athletes across multiple sports. Her fresh eggs were featured in high-end restaurants throughout the South, and her breeding program was being studied by agricultural universities as a model for sustainable protein production. The most exciting development came when Sarah received approval to expand her operation to include a research facility. In partnership with Louisiana State University, she established the Gulf Coast Alternative Protein Research Center, dedicated to developing new sustainable protein sources from native species. The facility attracted researchers from around the world who came to study Sarah's methods and explore applications for other species. Sarah found herself at the center of a revolution in sustainable agriculture, leading research that could help address global protein shortages. The transformation was complete when Sarah was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum's panel on sustainable food systems. The woman who had once felt invisible was now sharing the stage with world leaders and industry titans, discussing the future of protein production. Standing on that stage in Davos, looking out at an audience of global decision-makers, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her there. It had started with pain, desperation, and a swamp that everyone else saw as worthless. But she had seen possibility where others saw problems, and that vision had created something extraordinary. The swamp that Robert had mocked was now the foundation of an industry that employed hundreds of people and was helping to solve one of humanity's greatest challenges: how to feed a growing population sustainably. Sarah had proven that with determination, creativity, and the courage to see opportunity in unexpected places, anyone could transform their circumstances completely. 5 years after her divorce, Sarah stood in the boardroom of Swamp Gold Enterprises, reviewing acquisition offers from 3 major supplement companies. What had begun as a desperate attempt to pay bills had evolved into a $50 million company that was revolutionizing the protein industry. The numbers were staggering. Sarah's operation now included 12 breeding facilities across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida, producing over 100,000 eggs annually. Swamp Gold protein supplements were sold in every major fitness retailer in America, and her fresh eggs were featured in Michelin-starred restaurants from New York to Los Angeles. But the financial success, impressive as it was, paled in comparison to the broader impact of her work. Sarah had created an entirely new agricultural sector that employed over 300 people directly and thousands more in supporting industries. Her sustainable breeding methods had become the gold standard for alternative protein production. The recognition had been overwhelming. Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in sustainable agriculture. Forbes featured her on their cover as the protein pioneer. She had been invited to speak at conferences on 6 continents and had advised governments on sustainable food policy. The research facility she had established with LSU had become a global center for alternative protein development. Scientists from around the world came to study her methods and explore applications for other species. The work being done there was helping to address food security challenges in developing nations. But perhaps the achievement that meant the most to Sarah was the environmental impact of her work. Her breeding program had actually increased wild alligator populations by providing protected breeding grounds and reducing pressure on wild nests. The Louisiana Department of Wildlife had declared her operation a model for conservation through sustainable use. That afternoon, Sarah received a call that brought her full circle. It was from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, inviting her to join a presidential task force on sustainable food systems. The woman who had once felt worthless was being asked to help shape national policy. After the call, Sarah walked out to the observation deck that overlooked her original swamp. Hope was still there, now an elderly matriarch surrounded by multiple generations of her offspring. The swamp had been expanded and enhanced, creating a thriving ecosystem that supported not just alligators, but dozens of other species. The property that Robert had dismissed as worthless was now valued at over $20 million, but its true value couldn't be measured in dollars. It was the birthplace of an industry, the foundation of a conservation success story, and proof that extraordinary things could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. Sarah's children, who had initially worried about their mother's crazy ideas, now worked alongside her in the business. Her daughter managed the research division, while her son oversaw international expansion. They had learned from their mother that innovation often comes from seeing possibilities where others see problems. That evening, Sarah hosted a celebration at the facility. She invited Miss Evangeline, who had been her first encourager and now served on the company's advisory board. Jake, her first business partner, who had become her chief operating officer, and the dozens of employees who had helped build the company. During her speech, Sarah reflected on the journey. 5 years ago, I was sitting in that swamp, feeling like my life was over. I thought I had nothing left to offer the world. But I learned that sometimes our greatest strengths emerge from our deepest struggles. Sometimes what the world sees as worthless is actually priceless. The audience erupted in applause, but Sarah's mind was already on the future. She was developing plans to expand into other alternative proteins, exploring partnerships in Asia and Africa, and working on technologies that could help address global hunger. Later that night, alone under the Louisiana stars, Sarah stood by the water where it all began. The swamp was alive with sounds. Alligators calling to their mates, night birds hunting, the gentle splash of fish jumping. It was a symphony of life that had been the soundtrack to her transformation. She thought about Robert's words from years ago, "You're good for nothing." Now she knew the truth. She had been good for something extraordinary. She just hadn't discovered it yet. Sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in the places we least expect to find them. Sarah smiled, knowing that her story was far from over. She had proven that with courage, creativity, and persistence, anyone could transform their circumstances completely. The swamp had taught her that life finds a way to flourish, even in the most challenging conditions. If this story moved you as much as it moved me, I need your support to continue bringing inspiring stories like this. Like this video, if Sarah's story touched your heart. Each like motivates me to research and tell more incredible stories of overcoming. Comment below. What moment in the story marked you the most? Do you know someone who went through a similar transformation? Or maybe you have your own story of overcoming to share. I read all the comments and love getting to know your experiences. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and hit the bell. Every week, I bring real stories of people who transformed their lives in extraordinary ways. Don't miss any. Share this video with that person who needs to hear that it's possible to start over, who needs inspiration not to give up on their dreams. Sometimes a story like this can change someone's life. In the comments, tell me, what's your biggest dream that seems impossible? Let's create a chain of mutual support here. I want to get to know each of you and your stories. Remember, if Sarah managed to transform her pain into a $50 million empire, you can also transform your current situation into the starting point for something extraordinary. I believe in you, and this community believes too. Thank you for being part of this family that grows every day. You are incredible.